My spirit animal is a French grandmother living inside me. And I've always been very drawn to that idea of the family gathering around the kitchen table, big pot of stew. His generation was all about, if you're a chef, you're working as a hawker, right? And that was his image. And he was like, no, I don't want my grandson to have such a hard life. It's manual labor. We go back and we look at where hawkers came from, right? It was easy, a simple business proposition. I cook one dish, like char kway teow or fishbowl noodles or whatever it was, and I just collect the money and go. And I see the change happening with the controversy over home-based businesses now, right? I think home-based businesses are our new hawker.
Welcome to Before We Get There, the podcast where we explore people's journeys, how they got to where they are, what keeps them pushing forward, and where they eventually want to get to. I'm your host, Nicholas Braman, and today I'm joined by Anthony Yeoh. Anthony is the chef owner of Summer Hill Restaurant in Singapore. We talk about his journey as a chef, the evolutions of Summer Hill, the challenges of the F&B industry in Singapore, why he thinks home-based food businesses are the new hawkers, and much more. Enjoy the show. Hi, Anthony. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Nick.
Good to see you. I'm excited to talk to you today. And what I wanted to start off with is, I think we have heard about your really amazing dim sum style trolley buffet meals at your restaurant. And I think that'd be a good place. Can you tell us what that's all about?
Yep. Okay. So it's basically called the brunch trolley. And it's exactly like you said, it's dim sum meets French comfort food, which is what we've always been known for. So basically you come in and the food all gets wheeled around on the trolley in small sized portions. And the reason that we did that was we wanted to be able to give people the variety that comes with dim sum. And if you look at it, dim sum translates literally to touch the heart, all right? And it was designed around having all these small dishes to have with your tea and be able to share. And it creates that kind of very convivial mood. And so that's what we wanted to bring with this experience, but with French food.
That's really cool. I think I grew up in the US and you'd always see those jokes or memes about Westerners who go to a Chinese restaurant and they order their own like whole fish, all the different dishes that you still share.
Yes. But, like one person eating a whole dish of sweet and sour pork, right?
But since living in Asia, especially, that way of eating is so nice. You get to try so many more different things and get to sample. And it's just a lot more fun to eat together and sharing the experience instead of everybody having their own individual plate with different things on it that you have to try to steal from each other to get a taste of. So,
yeah, correct.
But you haven't always done that since you opened your restaurant. How did it start?
So we're actually known for very hearty, big plates. Like I always say, my spirit animal is a French grandmother living inside me. And I've always been very drawn to that idea of the family gathering around the kitchen table, big pot of stew. And when I say French cooking, I'm talking about really the country cooking, what the French call cuisine bourgeoise, which is the comfort food of the middle class. And it's always been the domain of the mothers of France. And that's how we got started and what we're actually known for at the restaurant. Because to give context, the brunch trolley is only a year old. But Summer Hill's been around for 8 years, and we've always been known for our roast chicken and our French fried chicken. So big dishes that you share around the table.
And so did people usually share those dishes, the big dishes? And so this is just more of a convenient way to deliver it without, maybe if you're a small group or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. Like we do the chicken as a whole roast chicken, for example. And there is no two ways about it. We try to do a half chicken and we're like, okay, it just doesn't roast the same. It doesn't come out the same way. It needs to be a whole roast chicken. So we wanted, and that gets a bit exclusive in the sense that if you don't have enough people to eat it, or if you're two people, you can certainly eat it, but you won't be able to have much more. And what we've learned with the brunch trolley is that people value variety, having that experience where you get to taste lots of different things, which is what dim sum brings. And so that has not just that's extended beyond the brunch trolley. We're actually incorporating that into our a la carte menu as well to be able to have that very, I call it generous flexibility about the way we eat, so that it's fine if you're a big group, but if you also come in as a solo diner at the other end, there is something for you.
That I like that term, generous flexibility. That's good. So
Mm.
you also change the theme periodically of what's being served. How do you come up with the ideas of what the theme is going to be?
So it's always built, we're a French restaurant, so it's always going to have a French background to it. The current menu, for example, is seasonal based. So we look at summer, and it's a Provençal picnic. And that's because there is like this just very strong connection with Provence, which is a southern region in France with summer there. So we built it around that. But previous ones have been really built around very personal connections for me about themes that I feel strongly about and how to put that across in the menu. For example, the previous one we did was called Savoring Stories. And that theme was built around cuisine bourgeoise, which I just mentioned is the comfort cooking of the middle class. But we framed it, or we told it through female food writers. So we took passages from female food writers that I loved and little bits of writing that really touched me. And we extracted the dish from that and then created a menu from it. And that was the theme.
That sounds super fun. So maybe let's go back to the beginning. And I've had a few people from F&B chefs on the show before. And one of the, I guess, probably a common question you get is, have you always wanted to be a chef? And when did you fall in love with food or cooking?
So haven't always wanted to be a chef. That's the funny thing. When I was young, I loved to cook. And I think it was pure gluttony as well. I was like, I love looking at all these pictures, but nobody's cooking them for me. So I was like, okay, I'm going to cook them myself. But then the idea of being a chef, like my family, my parents actually were like, maybe you want to go and be a chef. And I was like, no, I want to cook for myself. I'm going to cook and give it away. But the more, I think this is as you grow and you realize that what I really enjoyed was the hospitality of it all, cooking for people and gathering them around the table. And when I saw the effect that can have when you have a good dinner party at home and how it brings people together, and the food is such an important element of that, that's where I was like, okay, maybe I wouldn't mind doing this full time.
Well,
Yeah.
that's interesting because I think you often hear with Singaporean or Asian parents, they're like, are you sure you want to be a chef? Maybe you should go be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or something like that. But your parents were actually encouraging of you to do this.
Yeah, because I think it was so I still had that, but that was from my grandfather. My grandfather was I come from a family that was in the finance background, right? So banking and all this. So my grandfather was the one who was like, no, he's got a good education. He's not, because his generation was all about, if you're a chef, you're working as a hawker, right? And that was his image. And he was like, no, I don't want my grandson to have such a hard life. It's manual labor. And I think that's something that he was very concerned about. But in my youth, you don't care about that. I've got energy, I've got the physical ability to do that. But that has also evolved for me, because I realized that what I enjoy is not just to be standing behind a stove. And this ties back to why I became a chef, actually. An evolution of it was I really enjoy putting on the whole experience. And that's where I realized what I wanted to do really was open a restaurant. And it's not just the food, but the whole experience of putting together lighting, the music, the whole brand, the music, the experience from when the guest first calls in to book all the way to that last bite of dessert. How do we put that together? And watching that, when you flip the switch and watching it all start to work together, that is fun.
And so how did you, your love of French food and French cooking from the start?
I like I said, I always had that affinity for big meals around the table with the family. Grew up in a big family. I've got there are four boys in my family. And when I went to culinary school, I remember at the time, this was around 2006, right? Everybody was very much into modern European. That was all the rage, which was like this mix of everything. You used to have a lot of modern European restaurants. So you have a bit of Italian, a bit of French, even a bit of Japanese influence into it. And I always thought going into that, I really want to focus down. I went to Sunrise as well. So at Sunrise they call it the Global Chef Academy. So the course actually teaches you a little bit of everything. It's very multicultural, just like Singapore. So you learn Asian, you learn Western cooking. And I always felt, okay, I want to like double down on one particular cuisine and just master that. And I can always extrapolate from that later on. And so I was drawn to French cooking because there is this lore about it being writing all the rules for cooking, which is really just marketing. Now I've learned they were one of the first to write, to codify and put it into a cookbook. But yeah, so that's where it started. And as I studied and I delved deeper into it, I found that it wasn't the type of French cooking that I grew up thinking of, which was the tasting menus, the big plates with the tiny little portions in the middle, because I grew up in that era where tasting menus were coming up. And I found that, oh, I really love the warmth of that homey country cooking.
And are there restaurants in France that serve that kind of cooking, or is it just really just done at home?
No, there definitely are restaurants. There are brasseries and bistro type food ons as well. So you have to look for them, but especially outside, if you go outside Paris, I love the French countryside. You can find a lot of food like that. And depending on where you go, you can have very interesting experiences. If you want, like they have what are called table d'hote menus. It's like table D''hote, which come from 16th century, from country inns in the French countryside. And they would just put out like, for everyone who's staying at the inn that night, they put out dinner on the table and everybody comes around and eats at the same time. And you can look for those experiences still.
Oh, that sounds super fun. I think a lot of the time we talk or we think about heritage food in the context of Asian food, especially in Singapore with the hawkers or the challenges they have, as well as the food evolving as more influences come in and as time goes on. But obviously that happens in other countries as well. So how about for the French cuisine? Obviously you've mentioned the more fine dining tasting menu side of things and the down to earth cooking, but do you evolve the dishes at all after you learn them, or as you get feedback from customers, or as you think about it and taste it, or do you try to stick very traditionally to the original recipes?
Oh, definitely we evolve it and we cater it to customers. I think you still need, first of all, speaking as a restaurant owner, you need to think about your customer. Being completely purist I think, doesn't do you service unless there is a market for that. Don't be a purist for pure sake, but go back to business. Forget you're a restaurant. Business is about solving problems for people. And so if there's nobody in Singapore who wants that pure French experience, it doesn't work. And that's what I always remind myself, that I'm running a French restaurant in Singapore. And I remember there are some French restaurants that will not have chili sauce, for example. It's not French. But you're in Singapore. I can serve duck fat fries, but Singaporeans are going to want chili sauce with it. And they're going to want their steak well done as well. You have some people like that. And I learned very early on that at the end of the day, it's also about hospitality. And I want you to feel comfortable. I want you to enjoy the meal, or I can force my perspective of what French food is and ram it down your throat. And you're going to come back for one. You're not going to come back for the other. And this is what I try to teach the team who come up thinking that way, that look, if we get this uncle who's eaten, like my dad, for example, was someone who only ate well done steak. And I say, if he's eaten his steak well done all his life, do you think in the next 10 minutes while they're ordering, you're going to convince them that, they should eat it medium rare and you don't cook steak that way? No, it's not going to happen. But serve them the food, and you can you have a chance to try and convince him, tell him, but leave it at that. Maybe one day they try it medium well, for example. But I think that hospitality part, making sure you're thinking about the customer as well, is very important. On the other hand, as well, with dishes, adjusting them, I think tradition is also a dirty word because cuisine is always evolving. So if you want to say that we should stick to traditional ways of cooking, we should be going back to building our fire and chopping wood. What does tradition mean? And I think it's important. What's more important if you want to preserve tradition is remembering the history, remembering the substance, so that when you do change dishes and evolve, which is a natural part of any cuisine, you don't lose that heart of it. And that's what's important. Not so much that you cook it and the pieces of meat are cut to this specification and all that. Does that really matter? Or are you remembering why this dish was invented?
First of all, as a steak lover, it's still painful to see people eat well done steak, but I guess if it makes them happy, then that's good as well. But then, thanks for sharing your perspective. I think it's very interesting. But if you go to maybe the extreme, you see some people maybe doing Wagyu or truffle banh mi or something like that. Is it obviously sometimes that's oversimplifying it. It's a case of just marketing or just doing it for the sake of doing it, right?
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. And I think that's where you have the other extreme where you can be completely puritanical, but then you can also go absolutely bonkers, right? And you're just doing things just for shock value or because you can. And that's not being creative. It's just you running wild and not managing your impulses. And that's where I said, if you want to preserve tradition, remember that you're preserving the right things. So then you're evolving, what are you evolving from? There was a period where fusion cooking was all the rage and you had fusion restaurants. And it's like, what does that mean? Because all cuisine, if you go into your food history, is fusion cuisine. And a very good example of that working well and done well is all immigrant cuisines, because that really comes out of necessity. So if you look at, say, let's say Italian American food, for example, right? That is not purely Italian, but it comes from people traveling there and they want to emulate the same flavors, but I don't have the exact ingredients. This is what I have available here. And I emulate it so that I eat this dish and it reminds me of home. And that's how a lot of immigrant cuisines come about, which are fusion cuisines. But they still touch you. They still remind you of your grandmother's table. Same thing with Peranakan cuisine, if that's a very good local reference. That's straight Chinese, Malay marriages, and then you got to cook for everybody. How do you make it familiar and welcoming for the whole table? And that's where you get Nonya cooking, right? It's not because I was like, okay, let's get married and then let's just mishmash everything together. There must be, it's purposeful and it's deliberate. And I think that's where the magic lies.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think another well-known example is Chinese American food, which is basically its own thing. And it's interesting that you point out like immigrants adapting to new land. And for the Chinese case, it was often not only adapting to the local ingredients or what they didn't have that they used to cook with back home, but also once it became a business, catering to the tastes of locals and making it, whether it's less spicy or not using very foreign fermented things or what have you. I wanted to talk to you about one thing which we touched on earlier, but we heard, especially, at least for me, maybe in the last few months, I'm sure it's always going on, but the food industry here in Singapore, the restaurant industry is facing a lot of challenges. A lot of independent restaurants are closing down. I think high rents are something to do with it. The legacy from COVID and people's eating habits and work from home habits and all this sort of thing all play into it. I've only been in Singapore for 10 years, but certainly I love independent local restaurants that are unique. I don't want to end up eating at chain restaurants that are the same in every mall where you go and see the same 5 restaurants every time.
Yeah. Personality doesn't come through.
Yeah, and that's the problem, right? Is they're able to operate more cheaply because they have the volume and they have all these factors that allow them to keep costs down compared to somebody who's just running a smaller restaurant. What are thoughts on, as from my perspective as a consumer, what can we do to help support the industry besides going out to eat every meal that every chance that we get? And what do you think the future is? What does it look like? How can we keep from heading in this trend that seems quite worrying lately?
Okay, wow. First of all, I think that with chains, even they're not doing so well. So that's what's really scary is recent news. You had Japan Foods, which runs a lot of chains like Ajisen Ramen. They were making losses. They're listed companies, chains who are not just chains, but listed companies. Also, Lost Ground, Haidilao Lao is shutting down. I think the news just came out today. They're closing down their flagship outlet at Clark Quay. So it's not just the big chains, and those are really big chains. So that's what's scary, that there doesn't seem to be a safe corner to go to. As for what customers can do to help, I think it's maybe giving restaurants a break is one thing I can think of. Being a little bit more understanding. Not that you're supposed to accept bad food or bad service. When restaurants open up, especially, I think like it's this thing in Singapore, at least, where they build up the hype, everyone goes there. And the thing is, teams and restaurants aren't prepared for that. I think no business is at the start. Nobody starts at 100%, right? Nobody opens a project and then says, okay, there's no way we can be better and do this more efficiently or be better, right? It's a ridiculous kind of expectation. So when you see a lot of restaurants get hit at the start with this popularity and then they can't sustain it, and then people like, oh, this was disappointing, I'm not going to come back because it didn't live up to the media hype. So I think being a little more kind of realistic about their expectations is good for that, would help restaurants. Other than that, I think it's also that for restaurants themselves, it has been an incredible period of upheaval the last few years. And that's beyond everyone's control to a certain degree, because you had things like COVID, right? That just changed people's behaviors. And then there's a bit of whiplash from that because people, when everyone had to go to delivery, you didn't have a choice. Restaurants shifted to delivery. And then you also had things like cloud kitchens coming up, which burst up all over the place to cater to that. But then the moment dining opened up, you have this kind of whiplash where, okay, your delivery has to drop down. So then now you see a lot of cloud kitchens are shutting down and in trouble. And then you also had revenge travel that affected us a lot. People wanting to get out of the country and go on holidays. And then you also had a lot of shifts in the background, like manpower. A lot of people who had jobs in F&B shifted to other jobs in other industries. Hotels also face the same manpower shortage. And a lot of those people didn't come back or don't want to come back. They're already quite settled over the last 3-4 years. Why go back? So there is this period of upheaval, and I don't think we're through dealing with the effects of that yet. It takes a much longer time to heal than it does to hurt something. So for me, at least, what I've gone back to do is really go back to basics and do a health check. Look at the numbers, look at who your customer is and how you're trying to solve problems for them. It really sounds quite basic and fundamental, but it's also not accepting the status quo. It's like, I can blame landlords and rental and revenge travel and manpower and all this, but look, that's just being stubborn after 6 months or a year of complaining about that. If I opened a restaurant now, is a much better attitude to have. What would I do? I would have all these parameters. What's my business plan then? And that's what we did with the brunch trolley, because the brunch trolley is only a year old, actually. And we really analyzed who the customer was and came up with a hypothesis based on that variety, that spread, but that quality. And we went with it and we evolved it from there. And I think that's what has kept us, touch wood, going so far.
Yeah, and I think it's not only the brunch trolley is the latest evolution, but actually from the beginning, you have made several big changes, right? Because when you started off, you were more casual, takeaway, not a full sit-down restaurant. And then you've also moved locations. First of all, can you share, what were some unexpected challenges that you had after you first started your business, and how did you get through them?
all the challenges are always unexpected. Makes my heart pressure go up. We started out, for context, as a takeaway place. All right. So I was felt a little bit burnt out after doing restaurant because I did a restaurant before that, and that was for 7 years. And I was like, okay, I just need to re-energize and regroup. So I said, why don't we just do a simple takeaway place? And we're only going to do roast chicken, one thing. I'm going to sell it on paper plates. It's like almost like a food truck, but it was at Sunset Way in a little HDB shop house. And that went well, but people were like, oh, you know what? It'd be nice to have a plate because I want to sit here. So, can you give me a plate and cutlery and I can sit down and eat here? So I was like, okay, we'll get some plates. So we went to IKEA, buy those $1 plates. And then they were like, this would be nice if there was another dish that I could have, if you could do fish. So I was like, okay, just add on a fish dish. Okay, this is really good, actually. I like this French cooking. It'd be nice with a glass of wine to sit out here because you've done the place up nicely. So we're like, okay, people are sitting here. I got to put some plants in. And from there, it was like, oh my God, like now there's wine and then there was beer and then we had dessert. So we're like, okay, this is not a takeaway place anymore. And that's where it's grown very organically because it was literally listening to what the customers were telling us and following the numbers and seeing what people responded to and not just starting with being very fixated on my idea and my creative vision, but also how can I look after you? And that's where 6 months later, I said to Chris, who's my head chef now at Summerhill, and I said to him, look, people just want a restaurant. Let's just do a restaurant. And we know what to do. So we did that. And that's where Summerhill, I think, really started to come alive. But at the same time, we weren't built to be a restaurant in that space because takeaway, right? So it was retrofitted and jammed in sideways to that. And we knew that, okay, if this is going to continue, we eventually have to move. The biggest reason for me was it was mostly alfresco outdoors, which was actually a very nice experience on days with good weather. But during the monsoon season, even with the awning over it, the rain used to come in sideways, which is not fun on a Saturday night when, you're fully booked and your people are trying to eat their chicken and they're getting pelted in the face with monsoon winds. And that's where we moved to Orchard and we moved to Claymore Connect, where we are now. And then that came with a whole new set of challenges. We moved coming out of the pandemic, but that was a very challenging for me personally because it was such a big move. We doubled in size. And anyone who's ever done renovation knows, what a nightmare that can be. But also business-wise, for me, learning how to run the business, that was really a huge challenge and step of growth for me. Because I initially thought, oh, we're just going to move location and the people will follow us. And I had to learn that wasn't the case, that people who used to come to us loved us, but they were coming because of other reasons besides the food was good. They were coming also because I live in Sunset Way. So you are 10 minutes away from me. When I come home from work, I can just walk across, get changed in my shorts and t-shirt, and I can go have a really nice meal there. But now you move to Orchard, that's outside the radius of where I'm going to go for a Wednesday night dinner. So I had to learn that, okay, we need to actually find new customers. And that's where it was very difficult because it was like building the business again from scratch. And just learning that was even the problem took a lot of time and stress.
So I think that's really cool how it evolved organically and you listen to your customers. Enough people mention, hey, it'd be nice to have some wine with this. But you have the experience of having restaurants and being a head chef for many years before that. For somebody who maybe is starting their first business or is new to running a restaurant, it could be much more difficult for them it could take much longer for them to realize that, oh, we should pivot or we should adapt and evolve. Have there been any times where you think you waited too long to change something or to evolve in some way?
Oh, definitely. Every time I've made a change, I always think that's the first thought. Why didn't we do this earlier? It seems so obvious. And I think that is where I try to give myself a break and say, look, you learn this whenever you've been open to it and receptive to it to make that change. And I always wish I had made this change earlier. It always just seems so obvious, but I think it's always when I go back and I start to go back to basics when something isn't working and look at the numbers, review the comments, put down the fact. That's where I have these kind of ideas and epiphanies. And it's always when I don't do that, that I'll still be muddling around and I'll be doing stupid things like, oh, I think we need to change this dish and invent a new dish. And usually that's never the case. It's always something else, like I say, with the brunch trolley, with putting more, like we're putting more small plates on our menu now to emulate the brunch trolley on our a la carte menu. That generous flexibility that we mentioned earlier, that all comes from looking at numbers, and it's not actually changing anything on the menu. We're not actually inventing new dishes. We're just changing the way that we portion it and adapt it to different customer usages.
So sorry, without going into anything confidential or anything, but it's super interesting to me because I guess stereotypically I think of the restaurant industry and chefs and coming up with menus is more of a creative type of thing. But you keep mentioning looking at the numbers and going back to the basics. So is it really looking at how many different dishes each table orders, or what kind of numbers allow you to come up with these ideas of what needs to change?
Oh yeah, it's looking at the average check for the customer. How much are they spending? So this is like your menu engineering. You look what are they ordering first of all? What are your best sellers? And then you'd also you set targets. We set targets for what our average check should be, how much a customer should be spending that we aim for. And you need to look at your menu and see, is that even achievable, right? Because sometimes people price things too low, for example. Or you may be, to use the early example of having that whole chicken, right? People can't order that whole chicken if they're by themselves. So you automatically exclude people from coming and spending. They'll come and just order, oh, they can only have a soup because they're on their own and a couple of pieces of bread along with a Coke. They're only going to make it up to $20 and you want them to be spending $40, $50. You have to be able to make that possible. Otherwise, it's the most frustrating thing to go into a store and it's like, you want me to spend as much, but I have no problem spending as much, but you got nothing for me to buy in that configuration. So it's these things and why I say when you see them, you're like, oh my God, I should have done this earlier. It's such common sense, right? And this is where I always have to fight with the creative side, with the business side of my brain and switch caps, because the creative side is I've done this. I've put together this beautiful menu. I can see this person with this spread on their table and enjoying this beautiful meal. But then the business side is going, yeah, this person is coming alone. That is enough food that in your picture you've drawn is for 8 people. We need to change this and reconfigure it. Yeah. And so that's where I'm talking about going back to the numbers and looking at your pricing, your portioning, your average check, your sales, and then looking at how people are ordering. All right.
And so is this the kind of thing that they teach in culinary school or industry standards and that sort of thing that all restaurants look at?
Yeah, depends on the course you go to, because some courses are just purely culinary and they teach you how to cook and it's very much the craft. There are courses, if you go to more extensive ones, especially the degrees, like they will teach you about the business side of the hospitality industry. That's something that I also spend a lot of time. And this is something, if anyone who listens to this, who's starting their own business, is please go and look at the numbers. There are books on restaurant financial ratios out there, handbooks. This is not knowledge that is exclusive. You can Google it. You can buy books on it, read up on it. And it's also remembering that you're running a business. It's not just the restaurant. And the same rules apply to a business like Apple or Microsoft as they do to a restaurant. And there are a lot of case studies that you can read and learn from. And that's what I spend a lot of time doing.
And so now I'm thinking about if tying that back into the challenges we see with our local hawker culture and the business viability of those stalls. I'm not sure if Taifan Auntie is running her numbers and thinking about how to price the fish, but how do you think, again, going back to the chain versus the independent stalls, adding on an egg to your noodles or cockles to your char kway teow, how can smaller businesses and hawker style businesses learn from this and adapt and become more viable, more profitable?
So I have an interesting thought about this, not proven thought, but I think it is happening. I think that if we go back and we look at where hawkers came from, right? It was street food culture. And go back to the reasons why hawkers exist. Not now, but right in the beginning. And it's because it was cheap to set up. It was easy, a simple business proposition. I cook one dish, like char kway teow or fishbowl noodles or whatever it was, and I specialize in that. I set up a stall, one person or two people can do it, and I just collect the money and go. And simple. And now it's becoming more complicated with hawkers, with all the, because come down to it, the cost of running the business is getting more and more expensive with even hawker rentals and all the rules they have to follow. And I see the change happening with the controversy over home based businesses now, right? Because to me, that is where that need has shifted now. People can run it out of their homes. There isn't this huge setup cost, just like hawkers who worked on the street, where they just had a cart. They buy the cart and they push it out into the street. So, now you're doing it out of your home. It's something you already have. So that takes away that huge rental cost. And that's where I see it evolving. It's just in a different form that I think a lot of people have not realized yet. But I think home based businesses are our new hawker.
Oh, that's super interesting. I've definitely been seeing that in the news recently. And I think I have friends who have home baking businesses, for example. But if you start talking about maybe nasi lemak or deep frying chicken wings and that sort of thing, it sounds like it may be a little bit more challenging to do from a home-based kitchen and a professional one.
It is more challenging, but that's the thing. They scale it to what is needed, what is needed for them, what suits them. Because you do have places that are selling, and you have home-based businesses selling pizza. They don't have 20 different SKUs or a huge range on their menu. And this is exactly what hawkers are. It's like very focused, like on this one or two products that they have, and they sell that. They're not trying to make a huge amount of money, but the cost, everything makes sense for them. And that's really what hawkers were. It's just taken a different form that I think nobody else has noticed yet.
That's really cool. Do you think that there's an aspect of food safety or regulation or anything like that that needs to happen?
Yeah, it's very hard to regulate it. And that's the thing, unfortunately, where that was why hawker centers became hawker centers, right? So that they could collect them all, get them off the street, and then I can regulate you and make sure people stop getting food poisoning. I think definitely for the government, it is a numbers game. How big of a problem is it, and what's the downside? That's what people always look at, right? And so there is kind of safety in numbers that way, that if you do get a bad home-based business that ends up selling a bad batch of cakes, for example, it's not going to be 10,000 people. It's not going to be like McDonald's poison a bunch of people, right? So there is safety where they can pinpoint that person and then, okay, we need to go and shut you down. You need to stop. And I think that's written into their rules for home-based businesses already. But it's definitely evolving, because regulating them, doing inspections like you do for hawker centers, doing inspections like you do for restaurants that they do, is going to be a big task to even track down all the home-based businesses. It would mean that you need to start licensing them and issuing licenses, and then that costs money, and then we start all over again.
Cool. Thanks so much for sharing that. Home-based businesses, the new hawkers of 2025. One last question before I let you go. I like to ask all my guests, if I talk to you again in 5 years, what would you like to be able to tell me has happened from now until then that would make you feel like those years have been a success to you?
I'd like to be able to tell you that my business is thriving, that we've come out from the worst of the pandemic, because this is one of the hardest times that the F&B industry is going through, and that we've found a way to make it work. And we've done it by innovating and growing and evolving. And hopefully that has also contributed to the industry with whatever ideas we come up with, and evolve the F&B industry and help give other people something to model as well. Because if you look at it, not just the financials, the sentiment is also down, where people are in despair. People don't know what to do. Look at how Michelin was received this year. The news was just about how many how many starred restaurants shut down. That was the message from Michelin, that not even a star can keep you open. And so you have this sense of despair right now. And I hope that in 5 years, we've evolved, we've helped to adapt and given something for other people to look at and say, hey, this is a sustainable way to work. And that's the best thing I think you can hope for any industry in times of adversity, that there are those that will find a way to make it work. And I hope we're one of those.
Awesome. I hope so as well. Before we go, any ideas what your next brunch trolley theme is going to be?
So we're going to go to the southwest of France. Yeah. For people who don't know what that means, it sounds very vague, but the southwest of France is like what I like to call the area where all the things that Singaporeans love come from. So it's the land of foie gras, the land of truffles, the land of duck confit. That is where all of that was invented. That's where home is for all those things. The next Brunch Trolley will be all about that.
Awesome. Sounds amazing. We'll put it in the show notes, but where is Summerhill located and where can people follow on social media?
Summerhill is located at Claymore Connect, 442 Orchard Road on the second level. And socials, we are at summerhill.sg on Instagram and TikTok.
Okay, great. Thanks again for joining me, Anthony. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you so much.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Before We Get There with your host, Nicholas Braman. Please like and subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also find us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Before We Get There Podcast. New episodes are released every other Thursday morning. See you next time.